With the last of the Hatsuharus entering service and the Shiratsuyu under construction, Japan began work on its next class of destroyer. The Hatsuharus and Shiratsuyu, as completed, were a compromise that pleased no one. From a political perspective, after modifications, they failed to meet the goal of staying within treaty limits. From a military perspective, they didn't measure up to the Fubukis in firepower and were only as fast as them, so were a step backward. This was not the way to win a war you knew you're going to be outnumbered in. The Japanese solution was the same as always. Build a new class and lie about them. Not that they had to, since they hadn't signed on to the Second London Treaty. As always, they fooled no one. But given Japan's numerical and industrial inferiority, combined with the larger problem of the Great Depression, no one was going to call them out on it. So, in the second half of 1935, they started the 10 ships of the 1,961-ton Asashio class. The weight increase over the Shiratsuyu solved a lot of problems, essentially allowing them to go back to improving on the Fubukis, which is what they had wanted all along. Horsepower, and thus speed, went back up. The number 2 turret went from a single back to a twin and was raised to Superfire Turret 3. They were completed with sonar, and the torpedo armament could remain the same as on the Shiratsuyu. All this without almost rolling over. Overall, the Japanese were happy enough with these ships that most future destroyers would only be slight improvements on them. Virtual repeats. They were the destroyers the Japanese wanted, if not the ones they needed, but more on that later.
駆逐艦アサシオです。勝負ならいつでも受けて立つ覚悟です。
Asashio was started September 7th, 1935, and was completed August 31st, 1937.
駆逐艦大潮です。小さな体に大きな魚雷、お任せください。
Oshio was started August 5th, 1936, and completed October 31st, 1937.
道潮よ。私、なんでこんな部隊に配属されたのかしら。
Mishishio was started November 5th, 1935, and completed October 31st, 1937.
あら、自己紹介まだでしたか。私、荒潮です。
Arashio was started October 1st, 1935, and completed August 30th, 1937. Natsugumo was started July 1st, 1936, and completed February 10th, 1938.
おはようございます。朝潮型駆逐艦6番艦、山雲です。よろしくお願いいたします。
Yamagumo was started November 4th, 1936, and completed January 15th, 1938.
提督さん、おはようございます。朝潮型駆逐艦、峰雲、配置につきます。
Minegumo was started March 22nd, 1937, and completed April 30th, 1938.
朝潮型駆逐艦、朝雲、着任したわ。あなたが司令か。まあ、いいわ。私がやってあげる。
Asagumo was started December 23rd, 1936, and completed March 31st, 1938.
あられです。じゃ、とかは言いません。よろしく。
Arari was started March 5th, 1937, and completed April 15th, 1939.
かすみよ、ガンガン行くわよ。ついてらっしゃい。
Kasumi was started December 1st, 1936, and completed June 24th, 1939. Main armament was 6 127mm 50 caliber guns in 3 twin turrets, 1 forward and 2 at the stern. These guns were capable of 55-degree elevation, which the Japanese of course called dual purpose. Torpedo armament was 2 armored quad mounts, one between the funnels and one behind the rear funnel for the 610mm Type 93 long lance torpedo, both on the center line, allowing firing off either beam, and both at the main deck level. As was standard by this point for the Japanese, reloads were carried. The reloads for the forward mount straddled the rear funnel with 2 boxes on either side. The reloads for the aft mount was built into the rear superstructure. 16 depth charges were carried, and again, they were the first class completed with the new Type 93 sonar. Propulsion was provided by 3 boilers, 2 venting to the forward funnel and 1 venting to the aft funnel. These provided steam to the 2 turbines, which produced 50,000 horsepower, each driving one of the 2 propellers. This gave them a maximum speed of 34 knots. They had 1 rudder. In November 1943, Asashio and Kasumi replaced Turret 2 for more medium anti-aircraft and Types 22 and 13 radar. Depth charge capacity was raised to 36. In February 1944, Yamagumo replaced Turret 2 for more medium anti-aircraft and Type 22 and 13 radar. Depth charge capacity was also raised to 36. In April 1944, Asashio replaced Turret 2 for more medium anti-aircraft and Types 22 and 13 radar. Depth charge capacity was again raised to 36. Asashio started the war covering the Malaya invasion. On February 19th, 20th, 1944, she took part in the Battle of Badong Strait. At the Battle of Midway, she was part of the troop transport group and was damaged by a bomb. Repairs in Japan would last until the end of September, after which she would head south to the Solomons. During the naval battle of Guadalcanal, she was part of the halftime show bombardment that took place the night between the 2 battles.
救助中に攻撃なんて、卑怯だ!
At the start of March 1943, she was sunk in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Asashio started the war covering the invasion of Malaya and the rest of the East Indies. At the February 19th, 20th, 1942 overnight Battle of Badong Strait, she was hit in the number 2 turret powder magazine, which exploded but somehow didn't blow the ship to pieces. Repairs back at Japan would last the rest of the year. At the start of 1943, she headed to the Solomons.
しまった。どうしようもう、ここまでかな。
Near Manus, on February 20th, 1943, she was sunk by the submarine Albacore. Asashio started the war covering the invasion of Malaya and the East Indies. At the February 1942 Battle of Badong Strait, she was badly damaged. Repairs back in Japan would keep her out of service until the end of October 1942. At the naval battle of Guadalcanal, she was part of the bombardment force that took place the night between the 2 battles and was again heavily damaged when the sun came up and the planes came out. Back to Japan she went, where repairs would last until mid-1943. Yes, it took a year to repair her. In February of 1944, she took part in the Battle of the Philippine Sea.
こんなところで。
She was finally sunk October 25th, 1944, at the Battle of Surigao Strait. Asashio started the war covering the invasion of Malaya and the East Indies. She took part in the February 1942 Battle of Badong Strait. At the Battle of Midway, she was part of the troop convoy and was damaged by bombs, sending her back to Japan for repairs. With repairs completed at the start of November 1942,
あらあら。私を沈めるのね。覚えてなさいよ。
she headed to the Solomons, where she was sunk at the March 1943 Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Natsugumo started the war supporting the invasion of the Philippines and the East Indies. Next, she took part in the Battle of Midway. In August, she joined the Battle of the Eastern Solomons. On October 12, 1942, while helping the survivors of the Battle of Cape Esperance, she was bombed and sunk. Yamagumo started the war covering the invasion of the Philippines. On December 31st, 1941, she hit a mine in Lingayen Gulf. Repairs and training would mostly keep her around Japan until August of 1943. In June 1944, she escorted the carriers at the Battle of the Philippine Sea.
沈むのかな。朝雲ね。 じゃダメだからね。またね。
The Battle of Leyte Gulf. She was part of the Southern Force and was sunk in the Surigao Strait. Gumo started the war covering the invasion of the Philippines. Moving on to the East Indies afterward, she took part in the Battle of the Java Sea. Next, she took part in the Battle of Midway. At the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, she escorted the tankers. While doing a Tokyo Express run on October 5th, she was bombed and had to go back to Japan for repairs.
村雨さん、逃げて。ここは、この海はダメだから。逃げて。
With repairs completed in late February 1943, she headed back to the Solomons and was sunk March 6, 1943 at the Battle of Blockhead Strait. Asaguma started the war covering the Philippines invasion and then moved on to the East Indies where she was damaged at the Battle of the Java Sea. With repairs completed in April 1942, she took part in the Battle of Midway and then the Eastern Solomons. Next, she took part in both naval battles of Guadalcanal at the start of February 1943. She covered the evacuation of Guadalcanal and a month later, at the start of March, took part in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. She escorted the carriers at the Battle of the Philippine Sea.
山雲、また一緒だね。私、寂しくなんかないから。
But was sunk as part of Southern Force at the Battle of Surigao Strait, October 25, 1944. Orari escorted Kido Butai through the Indian Ocean raid. Next, she took part in the Battle of Midway.
水が入ってきた。冷たいな。
On July 5, 1942, she was approaching the recently captured Kiska when she was torpedoed and sunk by the submarine Growler. Kasumi escorted Kido Butai through the Indian Ocean raid. Next, she took part in the Battle of Midway. On July 5, 1942, she was approaching the recently captured Kiska when she had her bow blown off by the submarine Growler. Repairs and training back at Japan would take until September of 1943. Mostly assigned to the Aleutians, her next major action was as part of the follow-up force at the Battle of Surigao Strait. At the end of December 1944, she was part of the San Jose intrusion.
私が沈むなんて認めないんだから。
She was finally sunk in April 1945 while escorting the Yamato.